First of all, Kevin, thank you very much for giving me the honor of meeting Mr. Powell. Just in our short 45-minute conversations that we've had in preparation for this event, it's amazing the history that he brings to an understanding of what it means to be an African American in this nation who has served and has the depth of lineage that I think very few have. I'm a 35-year military veteran myself, and my history goes back to prior to World War I with my grandfathers, and I have personally within just my arm's reach of my brothers, first cousins, over 200 years of military experience ourselves through all services, male and female. And I thought I was pretty abreast of what we've done, but I think everybody's going to be wowed by what Mr. Powell's family has brought to the African American frontier and American landscape in general. So, with that, I really want to turn our attention to a scholar, a soldier, a son of a soldier, Mr. Powell. Please tell us about yourself, and then give us a little bit of that context that I that I would fail to try to get right.
Not a problem. Thank both of you. My name is Anthony Powell. I've been on the planet for 75 years. You know, this pandemic did something to me that I'd almost forgotten I had not completed. And what that was my mission to tell the story of the African-American soldier. For some reason, I thought that, boy, I may not make it through the pandemic. I had books that I had written, have been sitting up on the shelf for 20, 30 years that I rushed and published all of a sudden with the hope that some of my research would survive. I have lectured all over the country, from West Point to Yale to Harvard and to many other places. My main task was telling the story of my grandfather, an illiterate country boy from Tennessee who made the Army his life. And from his experience and the experience of those friends around him that I knew as a kid, it gave me a broad understanding of who they were and why they served this country. Many of us today live in a divided world. Our country is divided even today. But at the end of the day, this is my country. This is the country that my grandfathers, my great-great-grandfathers fought and died for. I don't care if they were black as the ace of spades and some were as lily white as white people. This is our story. This is the story of American history and something that should never be forgotten. And when you think about those men that I had the privilege and honor of interviewing, and they were a vast assortment of my grandfather's friends. And some of the stories that they gave me an insight into why they joined the Army. And jumping up to the 21st century, has that changed for Americans? Absolutely not. The main reason that many people of color join the Army is for an opportunity to move up and to move out. And when I say out, I mean, that's out of the dreary life that sometimes we live, but into a possibility of a future that your grandchildren, my grandchildren will always appreciate. And I don't just say this for people of color. I say this for all Americans, because at the end of the day, this is our country. Good, bad, or indifferent. This is mine. And I can go on and on. Sorry.
No, hey, thank you, Tony. I kind of put us together here for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that I believe today that we have a task that I want to focus on pulling all of my resources and all the work that we can rally around, taking the stories, the artifacts to some place where they can be conserved, preserved for future generations. And what that entails for me is to curate all of the things that we believe are assets that can be put together strategically so that we can start our mission in a very focused way to get the resources necessary to make sure that we're doing everything we can do to not leave anything on the table. So with that, I wanted to ask of all of us to try and create some type of mission statement that will help us in the next level of engagement move to a singular direction so that we don't have any missteps.
Kevin, I'm gonna push back a little bit because I know this is your show because you're Mr. Dakar, and I appreciate that. But I've got to push back. I think all the artifacts that Mr. Powell has, he both collected them and has a story that precedes why he has them. So those of us who want to see something, it's like I went to sleep watching the pyramids and getting the story of the pyramids in Egypt. Went to sleep on it. And I'm a fair student. But the reason why is because I was kept outside. And at the time I didn't walk up, I hadn't walked up to touch it, to see the magnitude and understand the blocks, the size of the stones that were formed and the story behind the stones. And I'm an alpha man, so the Sphinx has a great history to me, as do the pyramids, as a person of color, period. But it wasn't there. So the things, and we use the word trillions, it's probably more like the high teens of thousands of items that Mr. Powell has. They represent an African American's story on the journey of being part of the tapestry of America. And so to me, one of the stories I want people to understand why he has these things that generates your interest, that will generate the other stories, that will generate and even walk us down to the point of where we've had many athletes who've put this uniform on. That's going to get you to something that you've got a passion for, in addition to the things that need to be itemized, need to be documented, need to have the stories behind them. I think the stories precede the item. And then the item will require someone to do a drill down and keeps a person who might see it from falling asleep, because all of a sudden it's alive and well. It's like looking at the flag. There are many people right now who have made Colin Kaepernick into a hero. I don't. And I'm going to tell you why. It's not because he didn't stand up, because that is what I fought for his right to not do that. But see, he didn't know the story. Because the anthem and all of its lyrics, because it talks about slaves and things like that, a novice historian doesn't understand that, one, the Brits employed us to fight against these United States. But this flag that it has 13, there's 50 stars and 13 stripes. The bottom and top stripe is a red, is for blood. See, by his not wanting to recognize that that's his flag, somebody with his blood made that flag so that he could kneel. He could have a voice. And you've heard me say this before. See, as a quarterback, had he known that, had he done his study, pulled his book out, he would have been talking to his teammates and saying, man, look, when we're off as a nation on Tuesday, all of us need to go down to our capitals, our state capitals, and create our football NFL Selma. Let's walk to our state capitals. Let's go tell them. I promise you, he would have taken away Trump's ability to split us. He would have even elevated the game. He would have brought honor to guys like Charlie Davis, who wore the uniform when he played for the NFC Championship as a Green Bay Packer, or Rosie Greer, because they wore the uniform, played the game. But he didn't know that. See, this flag is ours. The first bullet that started this dream of a new nation in 1870 went into Crispus Attucks, a man of color, who wasn't just trying not to be a slave. He, in fact, used the words, I will not be a slave again to anybody. John Adams even captured that and used his blood, his comment, as a motion to say, and it goes to Brother Powell's book, because he talks about love of liberty even before the film, because he knows it. And I'm gonna, if I may pause just for a second, and I'm gonna come back to you if I can, Kevin. Mr. Powell, would you please share with us your comment to your grandfather about his talking to you when you were just a young 13-year-old Kaepernick who didn't quite understand in 1959?
Yeah, you know,
Please.
like I had mentioned before, thinking as a 13-year-old that I had knowledge that I didn't realize I didn't have was to ask my grandfather the question, why did you serve this racist country for 40 years? In his comeback, the Army gave me the only part of the American dream that the nation would let me share in. He concluded by saying, I regretted not 1 second of my 40 years. My first opinion was granddad's and Uncle Tom. I'm just an ignorant old black kid that thinks I know everything. And it took me a while to appreciate what this old man had said. He was an illiterate country boy from Tennessee when he talked his way into the Army at 13, having a drunk sign the papers to get him in. And as you mentioned before, back in the day, it wasn't that hard to get into the military as long as you were tall enough. But what did the military do for my grandfather that made his life so great? An education, an opportunity to literally traverse this country and the world. And I don't care if you were black, white, Irish, English, for a person of poorness, irregardless of color. This is something that the Army of the United States offered to our people. And yes, over the years, we've gone through a lot of changes and all of that. But what I remember, and what I remember most, is that those old men cared for each other. A guy named Vance Hunter Marchbanks, who joined the Army in 1890. When I got a picture from him, he became a warrant officer. He had served as a captain during World War I, couldn't become a regular commissioned officer, so he accepted the warrant. But he had mentioned on a photograph that he gave me of Troop L, 9th Cavalry, 1901, and Arizona. And on top of the photograph, he had written, "It has been 50 years since this photo was taken, yet I remember the names and cherish the memories of these comrades." Why? He says, they were the pure in heart. Well, I was a grown guy then. I understood what he meant. But many people today, we have a plethora of people that love Buffalo Soldiers. We got motorcycle clubs coming out to Yang, and yet they have not the faintest idea of what the service to these men meant. And when you ask them the question, well, what did these guys think about Native Americans that they were putting on the reservation? Well, no, they were thinking men. They did what they had to do because that was their job. I recorded every single engagement after the Civil War that African American soldiers served in. 89% of the wars of the Indian campaigns. And yet, there is not one allegation of a massacre or indiscriminate killing of Native people. But again, they were soldiers. And just as they were killed, they killed also. At the end of the day, Buffalo soldiers say, well, they got that because of the buffalo skin and all of that nonsense. When the Cheyenne gave this to my grandfather's generation, the buffalo was a sacred animal of Native Americans. And why indeed would you give your sacred name to someone that you despised? It was given as a tribute of honor to them. And lo and behold, those old colored men understood exactly what that was. And some 100 years later, the term is still there. We who understand the history know about it. And I think that this is the challenge for all of us today, is to educate, is to make sure that our grandchildren will understand that their grandparents and great grandparents were Americans.